Alright guys, so in this video I am going to be discussing kind of a dark game as it relates to VR and the Twin Towers and how all of this ties into the future with the rise of VR and everyone possibly wearing the goggles and situations like this possibly getting revisited. We're going to be talking about the game 846. Now, if that time is familiar to you, that is when the first plane hit the North Tower, and that's where this VR simulator game takes place. It was originally released back in 2015. It does not have very good graphics, and the reaction to this game was not positive at all, but you do have to wonder, based on morbid thinking and the development of VR in the next several years, with several big players coming out with their own versions of VR goggles, getting them priced lower, will more games like this be prevalent? You can take a look at some of the screenshots. The graphics, again, not very good. This was released in 2015 and there was not an updated version. So this is like the only type of game you will find, and it is self-explanatory. It takes place inside the North Tower, just above the impact zone at 846. It's the 101st floor to be exact, and as the VR experience goes, you immediately feel a shake right as you get into the game. There's like 5 or 10 seconds of normal, work stuff. You're at a desk and then you hear a shake. That is when the plane hits, and then you're left to scramble and try to find a way out. There is no real objective to this game. This is not really a situation where you can find different alleyways or things to go and try and get down the towers, because that would be another interesting idea for a VR game, trying to escape them on the upper floors. That's something I could see coming, but it is a very niche market. This is a tragedy, obviously, but in terms of just this game, 846, it is a very sad simulation, as you are trapped. There really is no way down, and you can peek out of the window. Obviously, when the smoke got really bad, they broke all the upper windows to try and breathe. You can look out, and then you will either, unfortunately, perish via smoke inhalation or fall down the building. So this is not a happy ending type game where it's like, oh, an objective, you got to find this, that, move this, try and get out of here. That's not what this game is. It's just kind of this weird simulation, kind of like a dark simulation of possibly what people above the impact zone of the North Tower felt. With the South Tower, it would be slightly different. I would say if you're looking for an objective-based game to try and get out of the building, utilizing the South Tower would be better, considering there was one stairwell that was still intact. You could try and maneuver some stuff, go to the other side of the building, find the stairwell, go down, and get out. That would be an idea. But in terms of this building, with it being titled 846, it is in the North Tower because that's when the first plane hit at 846, and you can kind of look out and see the other tower. And the smoke in this looks very strange. I mean, this is 2015 graphics, and again, they're not like making updates for this game. This game got received very poorly. People thought this was very distasteful, but because I am fascinated in this event, and I'm sure many people are as well, This is kind of a very interesting game for me, even if it is terrible graphics back in 2015. And I think the question is not just with an event like September 11th. It's interesting. Somebody in my Discord recently mentioned a very good idea. I don't know if you guys know the game. This is kind of off topic, but I just want to get this out. The game Titanic Honor and Glory, which is a recreation of the Titanic. Obviously, it had a terrible disaster. The Twin Towers, they had a horrible disaster as well. Imagine if we could explore in full HD. Like, if you look up the game Titanic Honor and Glory, it's very impressive with how HD it is. Imagine if we could explore the Twin Towers in HD and in really high-res graphics. It is funny, though, that game, Titanic Honor and Glory, they've been working on it for like a decade. It still hasn't been done, but you can kind of explore it. It did crash my computer, though. It's very hard to render all of it just because it is so detailed. But either way, getting back to the topic at hand, it's games like this. I did do a video, I want to say about 3 weeks ago, on some of the things they had to change within video games in relation to the Twin Towers, including a GTA game, including a Spider-Man game where they basically just took the towers out and replaced it with lampposts or little lamps coming out where the towers were. Very interesting in terms of how the Twin Towers have impacted different games. There's also a racing game that has the Twin Towers in it that's very eerie. But just in general, when you're talking about a VR simulation like this, it's not just September 11th. It could also be the Titanic. Like, imagine an actual video game of the Titanic being released to where you can go in different rooms as the ship is being flooded. Now, that's one of the really hard things in terms of video games, is getting water dynamics perfect in terms of flooding a room. They're getting better at it, but the problem is it's very hard to get the water dynamics right without making it look fake. But that's something that's very interesting. So possibly in the future, we could see something with September 11th, although comparing September 11th to the Titanic in terms of, it being appropriate, there's no comparison. The main issue is the Titanic was, in 1912. September 11th happened just over 20 years ago, so it's a lot fresher. And of course, it happened here in the United States, although I'm sure there are people watching from other countries. Most of us very fascinated with the Twin Towers are from the U.S., and it was an attack on us. So it's really not appropriate possibly to do a game like this, but I do find it interesting, the game 846. And I also find it interesting that they made the game like they did to where there's no escape. Some of that might have to do with having limited material in terms of, actually creating a version to where it's an objective-based game and you can't escape. This is a much more simplistic, toned-down variant of it. Maybe this was some type of test run, but you can just see this is even an article where they hate on the game. 846 is horrifying and distasteful. This came out right when the game came out over 8 years ago. So yeah, a lot of people did not like this, obviously, but I do think there is the morbid, curiosity in people that will cause them to download stuff like this and do things like this when they get the VR goggles, because the VR goggles are going to go mainstream probably 3 or 4 years from now, I would say, and all the kids are going to want them. It's the new Xbox. I think it's a very scary thing, obviously, but then again, we're sitting here all and I'm sitting on my phone 4 hours a day, and if you would have told me that 5 or 6 years ago, or 8 years ago, I would have been horrified. I would have said there's no way I would be that much of a slave. But that's just what happens with technology. We just submit to the technology because it feeds our immediate dopamine. It is an unfortunate fact, and I do think that we possibly will be seeing stuff like this coming out in the future where you can relive and maybe try and escape, maybe not, these type of events. But this just came out in 2015, and as far as I can see, there's really no one else that's trying to tackle this topic or do a game based on this because of the amount of negative publicity that they would receive. And in researching this, I was able to find on the R Games subreddit 846 a student project VR game. So that does make a little bit more sense that it would be a student project, considering if someone were to actually develop this and try and market it, it would go very poorly. But the idea of a student project where it's very bare bones, you could do some type of test run with a game like this. And then just looking at some of the comments, it says adding the siren noise at the end as you get closer to the ground. So as you fall to the ground, the siren noise gets louder. That is definitely chilling. And then this comment, it reminds me of a cool idea for a game that was announced quite some time ago. Adds to a link there. It was supposed to be pretty realistic and force players to make life-saving, sometimes controversial decisions, also regarding NPCs happening during historical disasters. It would test players' ability to survive, and this is what the link was. You can see Survivor for Xbox PC, which was canceled. This was back in 2009. It was a disaster survival game that was in development at Replay Studios back in 2004 for the original Xbox and PC. The player would have had to survive through historical disasters from the 20th to 21st century, like the Titanic, Hurricane Andrew, and or 9/11. The project was later canceled, maybe because of the controversial scenarios. Yes, but the thing about this, you can see this back in 2009, as we get more and more adopted to the internet, as we see more and more bad things, we're going to want to up the ante. There's going to want to be a viewer base that's going to want a game like this, or a player base. And so we'll have to see what ends up happening, but kind of just some interesting things there. Either way, guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you're following me on X. Link to that's always in the description.